Darling, did you know that 92% of the population is illiterate?
Good morning.
And that 1 in 5 babies dies before they're 4 months old?
Edwina, I could not be blessed with a more active, able wife, but sometimes we have to accept what we cannot change.
But we can change a lot, Dickie. We really can. And we absolutely have to. India's problems are not just political, they are social and economic. Almost half the babies born here die before they're 5. That cannot be the legacy the British leave India after 3 centuries. We have enough time to improve the infrastructure so that when we leave...
That is not why we're here.
Yes.
You'll wear yourself out.
I mean, I'll wear you out.
And that's a clip from the Viceroy's house. Delighted to say one of its stars, Gillian Anderson, is with us on the programme. Hello, Gillian. How are you?
I am good. How are you doing?
Well, I'm good. Can I just work out the role that you have in this movie?
Because, sure, yes.
So you're Edwina Mountbatten.
Yes.
I get that.
Yeah.
So you're married to Dickie Mountbatten.
Correct.
I get that. He's the Viceroy.
Yes.
What are you?
I'm his wife.
I know that. But what's the title is?
Oh, lady.
Yes, I know
He's
that.
Lord Mountbatten. I'm that. So, Viceroy.
That's the word.
That's the word.
I've
Viceroy. That's what you're after.
I've never seen it written down.
Yes, no. And it took a long time for me to get to the bottom of that word.
So it's the Viceroy and the
Viceroy. Yes.
Who knew?
Who knew? The last Viceroy and Viceroy of India.
Okay, so that's where we are. So it's the partition of India. Just tell us about the story that you tell in the Viceroy's house and where Edwina, your character, fits into this huge saga.
Well, in 1947, Dickie Mountbatten and Edwina Mountbatten are sent to India to stay in Viceroy's house and to apparently help India towards independence. And India had been ruled by the Brits for 300 years, and they were going to hand India back to themselves, and he was elected to be the person to help that happen. And they get to Viceroy's house and they find the 500 servants, and they find a situation where the politicians and the spiritual leaders of the time, which are Jinnah, who's Muslim, and Nehru, who's Hindu, and Gandhi, who's the spiritual leader, have very, very different ideas about what should happen to India and whether or not it should be. Well, the conversation about partition starts. And in our film, it appears that it is a new idea for Lord Mountbatten, the idea that the Muslims would get their own country, potentially called Pakistan. And so there is a lot of conversation and debate and input amongst all these political leaders, with Mountbatten at the centre, trying to determine if this is the right decision for independent India. And what we see at the end of the film is that this is a conversation that had begun prior to the Mountbattens arriving in India and had already been decided by the Brits, Churchill involved, for Pakistan to be divided off from India. And what we see as the consequence of partition is division, is violence, because for many centuries until that point, the Muslims, the Sikhs and the Hindus had lived relatively peacefully side by side. And all of a sudden, the idea of partition started hatred bubbling up, and many, many millions of people ended up being killed at the time by their own neighbours.
So it's a huge sweep of history is what
Yes.
you're outlining
Yes.
there.
Yes.
So there are a number of movies that could be told about this particular story.
Yeah.
Your story, obviously, given the title of the movie, concentrates on what is going on in the house, which becomes almost like a character in itself with its intrigue and, like you say, 500 staff, and the staff are divided and they have to make the choice as well. But who knew that, by which I mean I didn't know, that your character, that Edwina Mountbatten, was so involved and hands-on and was extremely political. And as Hugh Bonneville, who plays the Viceroy, says, you're generally to the left. But I didn't know that Edwina Mountbatten was so integral to everything.
Well, apparently she was. Apparently, as Dickie also says in the film, that she's much more of a political animal than she was. And apparently she would often get into political conversations with the gentlemen that she was sat next to at their dinner parties, the ambassadors and the politicians who were at their table. She had a very, very strong opinion, and I didn't know either. I mean, I didn't know any of this when I started working on the film. I didn't know anything about the history. And certainly the impact that both independence and partition had on so many generations.
She's a very interesting woman. I mean, the movie doesn't touch on her. She has an interesting relationship with her husband, interesting relationship with her children, and apparently an interesting relationship with the first Prime Minister, Nehru, as well. But presumably there's not room in this film to tell that story as well.
I'm not sure if we would have been allowed to film in India if we told that story.
Is that right? That's interesting. So, did you try and tell? Did you want to tell the story?
That's a question for Gurinder.
This is Gurinder Chadha who made the movie,
yes,
and it's a very. I should say it's a very personal movie for her, because when the credits roll at the end, we learn that her family, her grandmother, I think, actually made a very long trek as a result of the partition.
Yeah, very personal, and I think she's been wanting to tell the story for some time.
Was it her? Was it her who convinced you to take the role?
I think so. I mean, I might have agreed prior to meeting her. I mean, I think I might have agreed on the script, and my fascination with Edwina specifically, not knowing anything about her, and just how strong and forward-thinking a character she was, and the impact that she apparently had on the ground there, how tirelessly she worked. But also, I'm sure then in speaking with Gurinder about the history of her own family and how passionate she is about this, and getting out there a history that is so often overlooked and doesn't seem to be in many of our curriculums, just the impact that it had on so many.
And we see her, I mean, very early on, she sacks somebody right at the very beginning who is uncomfortable being close to the Indian staff. So you say, okay, off you go then. So she's very political. But I wonder whether by the end of the movie, you and Hugh Bonneville, the Viceroy and the Vicereine, are both kind of out of their depth, really. Particularly,
I think they're out of their depth when they arrive.
Straight away.
Straight away. I mean, could you, 500 million people that's been ruled over essentially by a bunch of white governors on the ground in various, with no understanding of the local culture and the religions really, or interest, and then this man sent to, a single person to go and to try and help them towards independence. It's an impossible thing. I mean, when you even think about what might have worked better, it certainly involves a few hundred people to make sure that there is a peaceful transition and that there is support, and so it was impossible from the beginning, but as the film shows, potentially impossible on purpose, that because he wasn't political.
Yes, implies that Mountbatten was a stooge, really.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And of course, into that there is a sort of, as others have commented, there's like a Romeo and Juliet, Montague and Capulet love story, which is sort of makes it all more personal, which is happening while all this chaos is happening.
Yes,
there is a very real love story which we're watching, which is very effectively told. And I wonder if a lot of people will feel it's remarkably contemporary. Really, that there are lots of references to the Brits getting out, and the timetable for getting out isn't wrong, and and then there's the refugee crisis, and there's border issues, and even though it's 1947 and is a story in its own right, it feels quite 2017 as well.
Oh, very. I mean, but, ultimately the story is about the politics of division and fear, and what happens as a consequence of that. And that's exactly where we find ourselves today, and our moral responsibility for refugees and for immigrants who are fleeing violence, and a lot of very, very contemporary topics.
I mentioned it's Gurinder Chadha's movie, who's been on the programme before, a very personal story for her. You've written and directed and produced before. Did you think, I think I want to go back and do some of this? I could do this again.
I always think that there was something that I was adapting something for about 15 years, a novel into a screenplay to direct, and it got close enough that just a couple of years ago that I had to start thinking about taking time off, and taking a year and a half off essentially as an actor in order to direct. I made a decision that actually I'm so lucky right now to be offered acting roles at my age for a woman. That no, I am. That it's potentially not necessarily the best time for me to take that amount of time off, and should I wait until I'm a little bit older to do that? So that was certainly a big decision for me on something that I had been very passionate about.
So that's been sort of
time.
parked, really.
Yeah.
So
but I'm very interested in directing. It's the timing. It's all about timing.
And you have a book coming out called We, which is obviously maybe easier to fit in around filming and schedules and family and so on. A manifesto for women everywhere. That's what are you tackling there apart from everything?
It's co-written with a very good friend of mine, Jennifer Nadel, who's been a friend for about 10 years, and it is based on 9 principles. Some of which are topics that are that are within this film: compassion and love and kindness and honesty and courage, encouraging women to look internally at aspects of themselves and choices that they make in order to go out in the world and be the most proactive, effective activists and that they can be.
And that book is called We, which is coming out very shortly. And as far as your future, Gillian, is concerned, I had Neil Gaiman on the show a few weeks ago. You do American Gods. And he has suggested you as the next Doctor Who. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yes, I did see that.
What did you? And the more I thought about it, the more he's absolutely right.
I'm afraid that's not going to be on the cards for my future. It's very, very sweet, and I appreciate being a part of the conversation.
He says there's nothing you can't do.
That's also very sweet for him to say. But yes, we did his American Gods. Brian Fuller, who did the showrunner and writer and creator of Hannibal, did that, and we shot that last year. And I don't know when this year it's going to come out, but that's what Neil and I did together.
So that's a no.
So that would be a no.
Okay, what do we see you in next, Gillian?
There's a couple of films that I did at the end of last year. Crooked House, a Julian Fellowes script and Agatha Christie story. And a movie called UFO with Alex Sharp. And
a bit of sci-fi.
Yes, yeah, which, and at some point those will come out this year.
You should do more sci-fi. I think you'd be quite good at that.
Yes, I've been told.
All right. Gillian Anderson, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.